Hey, everybody. Welcome to our multifamily investor discussion. This is going to be more of a regular thing that we do instead of as many webinars. Take a lot of effort to put out and a lot of mail, a lot of that. But we want to be able to get more content out to you guys quickly. Today, I'm joined with Hyle Bradley over at Real Property Management Solutions. We're going to talk about the recent legislative actions and its impact on multifamily investors. Hyle, thank you so much for joining me for this. We'll just jump through a quick agenda. I know we're going to talk about Senate Bill 1069, House Bill 2001, and Senate Bill 611. And then I'm going to throw my thoughts in at the end. I might pepper you with questions as you mention stuff, because there's a lot of stuff, a lot of moving parts here. Yeah, why don't you take it away, share your screen? Let's go. Let's jump into it.
All right. I'm going to start before I share my screen with a brief introduction of Senate Bill 1069, which was passed and signed by the governor at the end of last week. It will go into effect January 1st, 2024. And what the bill entails is it allows landlords and tenants to enter an agreement to receive and send electronic communication around notices. It additionally allows landlords to send money to tenants electronically. This will certainly make security deposit dispositions quite a bit easier for landlords, and it doesn't make any other changes around the timeline for the security deposit. So it's just a bill to ease us into modern technology from a tenant landlord perspective.
Cool. And that, like you said, that's good for everybody. So a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about makes things harder, but this is something that it's 2023. Thank goodness we've got these changes that are going to make things a little bit easier. It's crazy that it took this long, but here we are.
Certainly a step forward, Ben. I agree.
Yeah.
I want to take you through a little legislative update that's going to dig into Senate Bill 2001, House Bill 2001 and Senate Bill 611. We're going to start with 2001. House Bill 2001 offers some really significant change to the way that we operate as landlords day to day. And the first major change is around disclosures and the timing of the notice, specifically for non-payment. House Bill 2001 is really built, think of it this way, as a way to extend the timeline when you're entering an action for non-payment against the tenant. To start, you have to include a specific disclosure available from the Judicial Department online, or Oregon.gov allows you to download this important disclosure. And that disclosure allows tenants to see where, how, and who they can reach out to get rental assistance. Now, with the state earmarking a significant amount of cash for rental assistance, it's important that they clear the runway for tenants to get access. And part of that access includes a change in the way that we deliver notices for non-payment. The 3-day notice for non-payment of rent, gone forever. In addition, they've made a couple changes I put on the board there, changing permanently to a 10-day or a 13-day notice, and you have to include the disclosure I mentioned before. The other major change, specifically around the timelines, is that the courts have been instructed to extend a 15-day grace period before setting the first appearance date after the court filing costs have been paid. The process for ending a tenancy for non-payment is going to take a little bit longer, and it's going to be a little bit more difficult for landlords if they're primarily looking to end that tenancy for non-payment. The goal for the state is to get as much cooperation with this rental aid program as possible.
Okay, so just to put this on a calendar here. Rent's due on the 1st. Usually, a lot of people have like late fees after the 5th.
That's correct. Late fees.
So when this says shall give notice no sooner than on the 8th day of the rental period, that would be it's due on the 1st, late on the 5th. On day 8, you could give this notice, right?
That's right. A 10-day, you could give that 10-day notice instead of a 3-day notice.
Yes, but not until. But that 10-day notice, that 10 days starts. You give it on the 8th, so it starts on the 9th. And then, so 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th. On the 18th, they've hit their 10 days. And then at least.
And then if you file for,
And then it's 15 days, no sooner than so now we're on the 18th, and then 15 days, now on the 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, 32nd, 33rd. All right, so we're already into the next month.
and this is
before the earliest that you can get that first appearance.
that's correct, Ben.
Okay, fun.
And in addition, there's the next part that I'm going to show talks a little bit about why that's important. That calendar, that timeline that you just mentioned is so important. The other big change, part 2 of House Bill 2001, is the change to the remedy for non-payment. So Ben, when you were just addressing that timeline, there used to be, under the previous law, if a renter or rental assistance provider provided a notice after the first appearance date was set, the housing provider or landlord did not have to accept that payment. That is no longer the case. So House Bill 2001 specifically instructs all housing providers to cooperate reasonably with state aid programs. It also says that if a tenant or a state aid program gives a check or promissory note right up until the first appearance, the housing provider, one, has to accept it immediately, and the court is required to dismiss the case. So this is important for 2 parts. One, if you're not reasonably cooperating with rental assistance, you're right on its face, the case is going to be dismissed, and it's going to be hard to end that tenancy.
Yeah.
The other part, which you were just addressing, is that timeline as it pushes into that second month, Ben. The House Bill 2001's requirement is simply to remedy the notice for non-payment is to come with a check or promissory note for the amount of that on the notice, strictly based on the notice. So if you've gone into a second month and on the notice you didn't include rent for that second month, how could you? You couldn't know the tenant wasn't going to pay. The tenant only has to remedy the previous month, and then you start the cycle again. So for now, you could end up in a bit of a sort of washing machine effect of tenant pays, applies for aid, doesn't.
So when they say a check or a promissory note,
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question for me would be like, what does that promissory note look like? Is it just a notice from the agency saying, hey, we received your application, it's under review? Or is it, hey, we're going to cut you a check in the next 6 weeks?
That's a great question, Ben. And a promissory note does indicate approval from that state aid provider and the promise of a payment within a certain timeline. Now, that timeline, as you said, could be 6 weeks. We have seen state aid providers often approve tenants for 3-month chunks or more, depending on their individual position and situation. Okay. I believe this is in effect to alleviate what we're discussing now. But there is that potential that if the tenant just wrote a check, didn't apply for state aid, but then was behind on rent for that next month, you got to start that process again on the 10 days after the 8th.
I'm going to ask some questions, but let me know if you're going to jump into this and I'll hold. But so where does this onus fall on the tenant? Obviously, they would have to make that application, right? They have to reach out and do that. Like I remember in the early COVID stuff, everything like fell on the landlord. The landlord was held to all these rules, but the tenants weren't. They were supposed to make applications, but they weren't. So it was dragging out all these timelines, and they'd make application at the last day. Like, where does the responsibilities lie on the processes for getting this aid?
The payment timeline stays pretty static, Ben, in that once that first appearance date is set, if the tenant doesn't make that payment or doesn't get a promissory letter from their state aid provider, they're going to face a decision at that first appearance. Do they work with their landlord and tenant to try, or with their landlord or housing provider to work out a payment plan, or are they going to move out? And if so, what does that look like? Well, there isn't a lot of protection for a tenant who doesn't apply doesn't actively seek that approval and doesn't make any action towards making the notice amount whole.
Got it. Okay. Okay, cool. All right, I'll let you get back to your presentation.
No, great questions. So I just wanted to take a quick peek. This is the notice, the disclosure that will have to be included with any notice for non-payment moving forward. This is in effect now.
And real quick, Hyle's going to send me a copy of that notice that if you're watching this on our website or from an email, whatever, we'll include this or a link to it so you could get to what that notice is.
And there's a great website printed right on the notice that we should all just be aware of. It's www.courts.oregon.gov. And this is where you can download these notices. And there's also a ton of information and resources for tenants. So as landlords, we should probably be at least somewhat familiar with that website moving forward, as it's going to be a big part of Oregon laws around non-payment notices. The next bill that I want to talk about was Senate Bill 611. Now, 611 had some significant implications in its original form that we feel would have been very dramatically, in fact, detrimental to real estate investment in our state, and really hard, would have made it very hard to be a landlord in the state as well moving forward. The heart of the bill was a rent cap. We saw incredible inflation and rents go up after the pandemic ended in a way that made housing affordability a very hot topic in our state. And at one point, Senate Bill 611 had a hard cap statewide of 8% or 5% plus the consumer price index inflationary number, whichever was less. That would have been pretty rough for landlords across the board. Additionally, there was previously an exemption built for new homes where the first certificate of occupancy provided an exemption to this rent control for at least 15 years. The state's original version of this bill curtailed that, cut it down to 3 years, meaning if you were building this large multifamily property, or any property that you were thinking about renting, in 3 years, you were subject to this rent cap, whereas previously you had 15 years. That would have really, I believe, significantly hurt housing affordability, because it would just create an environment where there's less housing being provided or built here. It's not a very attractive landscape for investors. So thankfully, here's what the bill looks like. It's the lesser of either 10% or 7% plus the CPI. So know that 10% will be a hard cap no matter what. If for whatever reason the 7% plus consumer price index falls less than, that's your rent cap statewide. Every town, county, city, the state is the final authority on this. So this is effective immediately and moving forward. So if you have notices out for rental increases that exceed 10%, I highly encourage you to rescind those notices, take a look, make sure that you fall in under the current guidelines. The good news.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
To break that down real quick, we had 7% plus CPI, 14.6 for this year. City of Portland was 9.9% for what I call the soft cap, right? You could do 12%, you could do the 14.6, but then you had to pay that relocation.
That's correct.
And Oregon always had a hard cap where you just can't go over that at all. With this change, that hard cap is now 10%. So City of Portland relocation, that City of Portland relocation exists, but relocation based on above 10%, them opting to move, that's no longer a thing. That's
right.
But you'd still have relocation for any of the other landlord for reason causes that you'd have to pay. And I assume that for the City of Portland, their relocation is still going to be based off of their sliding scale of the unit mix versus the 1 month rent or whatever it is elsewhere.
Absolutely correct, Benjamin. And in fact, one of the parts of 611 that did not pass was a change to the mandatory relocation payment that would have placed a similar, it would have been similar to the Portland statute, but it would have been statewide, and it would have been 3 months of relocation, 3 months worth of rent as a relocation payment. And that got for anyone who owned more than 4 units of property. So and in any scale. So that included timeshare, vacation house, primary residence, and investment property. Yeah. So that was taken out of the bill. And as a result, you're right. The relocation part of the bill, part of the state's law, stays the same. In Portland, you're exactly, you've been rendered neutral by the hard cap of 10%. So that likely isn't going to be something that comes up in Portland properties. Yes, the relocation in the city of Portland is going to continue to be based on the bedroom, their in-house built scale based on bedroom count.
Yeah. Got it. Okay.
The original version of the bill was significantly reduced. All that, the bad news that we were concerned about was taken out thanks to a lot of great interaction from the public and concerned landlords being involved in the legislative process. And here's our takeaway when we look at these major bills. The big one in House Bill 2001, you got to include that disclosure with your notice for non-payment. Your notices have changed. So the 72-hour notice is now a 10-day notice. There's, of course, the requirement that you work with all state aid providers. So if you're not reasonably cooperating, know that the penalties are significant. And a promissory note from a housing provider does equal a payment when it comes to that 11th hour payment. So just know that you do have to accept those. And you have to accept any 11th hour payment now from a tenant. When you didn't, this wasn't the case previously.
So quick question on that promissory note once again. Have you guys, because you guys would have collected some of that stuff previously for tenants.
Absolutely.
Have you seen promissory notes, or is it just checks coming through?
We have. We do typically see a promissory note. Sometimes a promissory note comes and the follow-up is in a week. We get the full amount of rent. Often it's 4 to 6 weeks. But typically when folks are applying for this public assistance around rental aid, the state isn't, or these state aid providers have been educated and they know that it's not likely that if a tenant isn't paying rent this month, that their finances are going to change dramatically and they'll be able to pay next month as well. So there is a avenue toward helping the tenant make sure that they don't end up in this position again. However, the law doesn't explicitly address that, which means that you can end up in that position, as we addressed before.
The washing machine.
With that month timeline where they give, if the promissory note comes and it only encapsulates the amount of money on the notice and the tenant doesn't pay rent that next month, you'll have to start the process again. Yeah.
So unless they've got the winning lottery ticket for 3 weeks out, what are the odds that something's going to magically change for certain, right? In your typical experience with this stuff, tell me, what does a typical promissory note look like? Is it like, typically here's 3 months and you'll get it in 4 to 6 weeks?
It typically will say that it'll say that the tenant has been approved and that they're going to pay amount X subject to the production of a check, and they'll give you an estimate. But the most important part is that it's approved, the tenant's approved, and you're going to receive X amount of money as denoted by the application. And they'll actually verify, they'll need to verify with you as the housing provider as well
that they actually owe the money. And last question, and then we can move on. Does that, I assume that check is sent directly to you?
That's correct.
Not to the, but they need to verify with you that the tenant owes the money, not just them getting 3 months paid rent ahead of time just for giggles, right?
The application and screening process is specific. Absolutely.
Got it. Okay, cool.
611, the big takeaways are, yes, there's rent control. Yes, it's harder to be a landlord. It's not as we've seen inflation cause prices and pricing to go up on virtually every good or service we can experience, describe, or purchase. In our state, rent control is here to stay, and it's a hard cap. 10% could have been worse. And there's still no cap between turnovers. So if you have a tenant move out of your place, or if you end the tenant's tenancy for non-payment or for violation, you can certainly raise the rent to wherever you want. There is one nuanced part of this that is a holdover from Chapter 90, which was simply that if you end a tenancy inside of 1 year for no cause, and then you place that property back on the market, you can't advertise it for more than what the previous rent was. So you can't, they're inside of a year. If you end the tenancy as a landlord, you are capped by where you had the rent previously.
It can't be that you rented it for $1,000 and a month, then you realized, oh wow, this should have been $2,000. I'm going to end tenancy and then go up to $2,000.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, it's built. It's just a mechanism to prevent that sort of what we could call kind of greedy behavior, which we generally don't experience in our state. But
yeah, really, that's just a function of before you put your place up for rent, make sure you're getting close to market levels.
Absolutely,
make sure you know what your actual market level rents are. Where I really see this is when the rent control stuff first came out. The people hear 7% plus CPI, or now these new terms. That's not bad. It is pretty good when you're 1 or 2 rent raises behind market level. But I deal with people. We did a deal a few years ago. Rents were averaging $725 for 2 bedrooms, and pro forma was $1,500. So where it hurts people is when you're that far behind in rents, and now you're capped at 10%. It's going to take you 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years to get to today's market level rent. So that's where people hear 10% rent increase. That's great. Yeah, but if you're paying $2,000 and market rent's $2,000, you're not getting a 10% rent increase because the cost of turnover, no landlord's going to do that unless you needed to get out for some other reason. So yeah, it's not bad in a perfect world, but I can jump into my slides whenever. I've got my thoughts. If you want to keep going, go for it.
That's all I had today was those two big changes. So I'm going to stop sharing and pass it over to you, Benjamin.
Awesome. Perfect. I sincerely appreciate it. Here's the big thing. It's going to be harder to be a landlord in the future than it is today, right? We've seen these legislative changes. We've seen the ones in the past. It feels like it's slowing down the impact of this legislation, but it's not going the other way. It will be more difficult to be a landlord in the future than it is today. And what that means for the people watching this, it means more risk for landlords, which means lower demand, and higher supply and lower demand means lower values. If we dove in a little deeper, it's as difficulties rise, as it's harder to be a landlord here, locals, most of my business is local owners who've owned 15 to 20 plus years, and they're all getting out of the market. And who's buying those? It's out-of-state people who are going to some of the giant corporate landlord shops. It's shifting those dynamics of one thing that made Portland great. So what I really loved about our market for a really long time, and there's still pieces of this, is just the sheer number of local landlords who have a great relationship with their tenants or with their property managers, right? You can call them, you can get a hold of them, they come out and they fix the stuff that they're going to do. But as things become more difficult and more landlords are opting to exchange out of our market because it's just too difficult here, those deals are being picked up by those out-of-state guys who may have never seen the property. They may never walk the property. They're going to go with some big corporate property management shop who, you're going to, as a tenant, you're going to have to follow up 5 or 6 times to get your air conditioning fixed or to get your heater fixed, whatever it is. And it just changes the dynamic of the market. It changes that Portlandia feel of local small business owner, landlords, tenants. That whole thing is just changing a little bit, which is tough. Now, of course, local investors do remain, right? But they're now considering new risks in their valuation, right? Mm-hmm. They have to change what they're willing to pay because they have to account for. I remember one time, and this is a little rabbit trail. I was talking to Dan probably 2 or 3 years ago. It was right after the Portland Fair Ordinance happened, and all of these extra steps that you as property managers have to take, and as local landlords that you have to take to stay in compliance, the workload for that. There's a reason everybody's rates that they're charging are going up, and it's because you're adding all this extra red tape to get through. And of course, some of it's needed because there's some bad apples, but it just makes it more difficult. And when that happens, it's that extra risk and that extra cost it's calculated in property management by fees going up. It's calculated by landlords with rents going up. The only people who don't really have control about that are the tenants, and they're the ones being hurt, precisely the opposite of what the intention is.
Exactly.
So as you're reevaluating your real estate plans, and you should be with the shift in this market, coupled with this and future legislative changes, you've got to ask yourself, what does waiting do for me? Right? Not everybody should sell right now, for sure. Not everybody should buy right now, but everybody should be doing something with their portfolio. Putting your head in the sand is not, it's a decision, but it's a bad decision, right? You've got to be doing something, right? You could be reevaluating your rents. You could be taking a look at, you could be spending this time, the market's slow right now, but you could be taking this time to evaluate your processes, to look at your leases, make sure everything's in compliance. So there's a lot of good reasons to wait, right? You want to wait to do something because you need to get your rents up. There's a good reason for a lot of people to wait. Probably 99% of the people who are watching this. But if that's not you, if you're thinking of making plans in the next 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 years, what really are you going to be waiting for? Are you waiting for values to go up? Because we're not really on that trend right now, right? We operate in like these 10-year cycles, and we clearly just ended one. So what are you waiting for? If you're waiting 2 years, you're probably going to be waiting 10 years till we hit the peak of our next market, 7 to 10 years. Is that what you're wanting to do? Or are you just got to decide, is it a market reason? Is it a personal reason? What are we waiting for? You got to ask yourself, is it going to be easier or harder to be a landlord in the next 3 to 5 years? We talked about the risks and what that does to demand and what that does to supply. More risk means buyers are a little more cautious, and it means more sellers are looking to get out of the market. So we see demand go down, supply go up. How does that impact your value? Is it going to be easier or harder to sell with future legislative changes? We knew from the beginning when rent control passed in 2019, that version of it, we knew that this is the toehold to start scaling in and bringing things back. And that's precisely what's happening, right? That's Senate Bill 611. So is it going to be easier or harder to get that done? It's a big ship to turn around, and I don't think we're going to see it turn around at all. I think it's here to stay. I think this is the direction that we're going as a market, and whatever Portland does happens statewide in the near future. So there's opportunity in this market, but you got to decide, do you want to go that path or not? And most importantly, you got to ask yourself, am I on track to accomplish what I want to accomplish with my real estate investments? And you can't answer that if you don't know where you're going, right? The next best thing to do would be to reach out to someone like Hyle or myself. Let's chat. It takes 15 to 30 minutes, and we're going to help bring clarity to what you have, where you want to go, and how you can get there, right? And again, for most people, it's not, hey, sell your property now. It's not, hey, quit self-managing and have real property management take it over, right? It's really getting that big picture clarified and then plotting a course of action to get you where you want to go. Yeah, so the next best thing, reach out to myself or Hyle and figure out what your next steps are, right? Reach out, figure out where you can go and what steps we can do to take you there. Really, I feel like the impact of these legislative changes is it's just going to be more difficult to operate as a landlord, and that drives down demand. and or you still have the demand. There's still plenty of demand, but it's coming from all these outside parties, and they're calculating that risk in a way that a local investor might not. Just something to think about. Hyle, anything you want to add? Anything else you want to chat about?
Just want to add and piggyback on what you just said. Right now is not a time for head in the sand behavior. It's a great time to really be looking at rents, expenses, the overall health of your real estate portfolio, and whether that does lead you towards a path of potentially selling now or in the future, or simply augmenting the portfolio that you have with adding a bathroom to a specific property or taking a look at some costs around your day-to-day operations. I think it's a great time to make sure that you're in prime health, because you're absolutely right, Benjamin. The environment is not going to become magically more landlord friendly. It's going to require more labor from us as property managers and us as landlords to continue to make the same amount of money. It's definitely a time not to stand pat.
I was talking to a client this morning on the way into the office, and we were talking about how we need people to, and I should just do a whole video on this. We need to get away from this idea of real estate being passive income, because it's really not. One thing that I loathe about our industry is everybody needs to own all the real estate they can get their hands on, and it's mailbox money, right? Sitting on the beach, rent checks come pouring in. It is not that. When you invest in real estate, what you're really investing in is a business, right? And you can operate that business at a 7th level where you're outside of the normal operations, and then you're getting that money coming. But it doesn't just happen that way, right? You have to build and operate that business to hit those goals. And, we got to get away from this idea that it's all passive. You don't have to pay attention to this stuff. This is what is affecting your business's value moving forward. We're dealing with this client that I was talking to. He picked up these fixer properties, and they're major fixtures, $300,000 to add to fix it, to make it livable. And all of those major systems that need all of this extra work are simply because the previous landlord was not paying attention, was not keeping up on deferred maintenance, was not keeping up on the tenants who are not paying rent, let it go for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And then your property is, and it's not a greedy landlord mentality. It's you need to be a good steward of the business that you've purchased. So anyway, I could chat for another half an hour about that stuff. Hyle, thank you so much for doing this. We're going to be doing these weekly, or I'm shooting for weekly multifamily discussions with different vendors. And obviously we love the guys over at Real Property Management. So ideally we're at least once a month, if not more than that. We're going to try to do these quite a bit and get them up on our website, multifamilymarketupdate.com. And anyway, any questions, anything in the future that you want to know about, or you wanted to discuss with us, just reach out. Let us know, send a carrier pigeon, text, or whatever it is. Reach out, let us know, and we'd be happy to help. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Hyle, I sincerely appreciate you taking your time today.
Thank you so much, Benjamin.
Awesome, thanks.